Here's Chapter 5 of The Whistling Mountain by Mary Daem. For some time David had been sure he heard a bell ringing, and now, as he opened the back door, a brown box high up on the wall did ring. A short tinkle, then a long ring, then 3 short, sharp ones almost together. "Hey," he exclaimed, frowning up at the contraption. "What's that thing? Why does it ring like that?" "That's a telephone," his father said with a laugh. "That doesn't look like a telephone, Dad." "No, at least it doesn't look like the one we had in Vancouver, I admit. But this is a telephone just the same. It's a line telephone. No one who uses it has a number, but they do have a ring. Ours, the Swiftwater warden's cabin, is 1 long ring, 1 short one, and 1 long ring again. Try and remember that. Oh, and when someone is talking on this kind of a telephone, anyone else with a telephone in their house can pick up their receiver and listen. It's rude to do that, but some people do." David looked very interested. Just then, the telephone jangled again, a short and long, a long and short. After a moment, the same rings were repeated. "I'll answer it," David volunteered, reaching for the receiver. "Don't touch it." His father's tone was sharp. "It's not for us." "Gosh, I just meant to be helpful," David grumbled to himself. He went slowly out the back door and sat on the steps. There seemed to be a lot of don'ts around this place. He was learning a new one about every 10 minutes. It was cold outside. He pulled his red sweater down as far as he could. He looked across the clearing at the thick undergrowth of bushes. That was where the bear had gone, and he hoped it stayed there. He hadn't been afraid, but he'd just as soon it didn't come back. Over in the corral were several high stumps, all that was left of some trees, which must have been cut down, perhaps to make the cabin. David went over to look at them. Some were new and yellow, and some were old and dried. The old ones sprouted ferns and toadstools and ridiculous tufts of grass. They might be good for climbing. David's face brightened. The creek at the edge of the trail looked interesting too. It might be fun to try fishing in it, but it would be much more fun if there were some other boys to try it with him. David wasn't used to playing alone. Even with the cabin door shut, he could hear that telephone ringing. Silently he counted the rings. 2 shorts, then 2 longs and a short, and after that a short and a long. How did anybody know their own ring, David wondered. 1 long, 1 short, and 1 long again. David jumped up and burst into the kitchen. "It's for us, Dad." His father was already at the telephone, and he frowned, willing David to be quiet. "That was from Field, Mary," he said to David's mother. "The horses will be here tomorrow. 2 of the trail gang will be coming on the morning train to help me bring them up." "Horses? Oh boy! And are the trail gang going to stay with us?" "Remember I told you that the trail gang have their own quarters in the storage building over by the barn. They look after themselves. I expect they will be around all summer, helping me clear the trails and get them in shape in case of fire. There are always trees falling across the trails, or rocks rolling down, or parts of them being washed away by the spring runoff when the snow melts. And if we were to get a fire in this district, the place would be crawling with men. That's why we keep so much equipment in the storage shed." "How many horses, Dad?" "I'm not quite sure. They may send a saddle horse for me, but the others are pack horses. There should be about 4, and they are to be used for packing, not for riding. The saddle horse won't be gentle enough for you to ride either." David's face showed his disappointment. "Right now we only need working horses. These are pack animals. They'll carry bedding and food and picks and shovels and tents and all the heavy equipment we need to clear trails far up the mountain or to get to a fire if one breaks out. Do you think if they got used to me, they'd let me ride them? Most certainly not. These horses have been running loose all winter and they're wild. They aren't used to a saddle. They'll stay in the corral when we aren't using them. They could kick you into the middle of next week if you got behind them. Now you're positively to stay away from there when the horses come. Do you understand?" David understood. He understood that there was still another thing he couldn't do. Grumpily, he went outside again. He walked down the steps, crossed a tiny yard, and wandered over to the creek. The creek wasn't very big. It was just a baby of a creek, but it trickled happily along beside the trail leading to the town. Wildflowers grew beside it, and wild grasses grew in it, and across its surface long-legged water bugs skittered. David knelt down to get a closer look at them. They had the longest legs, and they slid across the water as if they were skating. He picked up one on a twig, looked at it, and let it go again. A dragonfly, its body shining blue and black, hovered above David's head, then came to rest, with wings still vibrating on a sturdy stem. David reached for it, and it was gone, too fast for his eyes to follow. There were shining pebbles in the creek, and David reached for them and made a little pile beside the water. Most of them were white, but there was a red one and a brown and a real beauty with streaks of green. He had to reach for that one, and gradually he moved down the trail, a foot at a time. He had just retrieved the brightest stone of all, a stone that glistened with tiny specks of gold, or of silver, he was sure, when his eyes saw something else right on the trail beside him. There were marks there in the soft mud, and although he had never seen such marks before, he knew what they were: bear tracks, made that very morning by their little visitor. David shivered and looked back over his shoulder to make sure the cabin was in sight. His mother stood at the door, shaking a dust mop. She waved, and David shook a wet and muddy hand at her and went happily back to his playing. But just in case the bear came back, he searched around and found a rock, just the right size to throw. And then he found another one just a bit larger, and another, until he had a pile of them beside him. The creek was very narrow and not very deep, and David imagined it would be easy to build a dam. He set his lips and tried to whistle, while at the same time he lifted the rocks from his pile and placed them one by one across the running water. Behind his row of rocks, he placed sticks and mud and more rocks, and the running water slowed to a trickle and began to back up. David shouted with pleasure, "David, David!" His mother was calling, and David knew why. It was dinner time. He could tell because all of a sudden he was hungry, just as hungry as a bear. He scrambled to his feet and hurried up the 27 steps and around to the back door. That's the end of chapter 5.